Hey, deserving listeners, it's time for me to react to your comments from my videos from the last 2 or 3 weeks, really. It's been a while since I've done this. This whole comments video will be on Love is Blind comments, and I'll do another video on 90 Day Fiancé and Darcy and Stacey. Love is Blind number 1, Nadine says, I'm in Seattle, and a producer reached out to me to be on this season of Love is Blind. You gave all good points as to why Seattleites would not go on this show. The reason I didn't respond to the producer, besides being overworked in the tech industry, is that I've watched far too many analyses of the psyches of past seasons' casts to put myself through that. Okay, I mean, it's hard to know why it would be hard to find enough people, and who knows if they had a harder time in the other cities as well. I actually heard a rumor that they're trying to film Love is Blind in Washington, D.C., and they're having a hard time there as well. So I don't know. I think it also could be that they're more selective. I don't know, because it seems like other reality TV shows don't necessarily have that problem. I don't know. I would like to hope that Love is Blind actually tries to create an authentic experience, one that is real. You know, there are other shows, I don't know about The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, but I've heard from people who were on the show who will tell me that the vast majority of people who go on that show are not there to actually meet someone to marry. They're there to have fun, or they're there to get clout, or they're there to raise their profile or whatever. Whereas with Love is Blind, I think they're actually trying to keep it real, to keep it honest, so that it's more interesting to watch. Who knows? Maybe there's a fair amount of people that go on there who are not actually there. But, you know, just think about if no one actually got married and stayed married on this show, it would lose all of its meaning, wouldn't it? It'd just be like some weird speed dating experience, not the rest of people's lives. You know, their families, their grandchildren depend on this show working out the way that it does. You know, it raises the stakes and it makes it more interesting. All right, Love is Blind number 4, Karichu says, in my corner of the world in the US, a man cheating is blamed on a woman regardless. Right, so I was talking about how anecdotally I will hear people, if they hear about in heterosexual relationships, men cheating, they think he's a dog, and meaning that he's a psychopath or a narcissist, or he's uncaring or a sex addict or something. And then if a woman is cheating, then of course it's just anecdotal, but often a follow-up question is like, well, what did he do? Or how was the relationship? Usually context, or even just flat out blame, like he must not be a good husband or something like that, or he's not a real man, something like that. So what Karichu is saying is, in my corner of the US, a man cheating is always blamed on the woman because she let herself go, which, yeah, we could see people being sexist in that way. And also, well, knowing how men are, it's her fault. So that's another thing that is put out there. So it's like, well, hey, men are going to cheat. And I've absolutely heard that too. In my neck of the woods, I don't hear that. Or in my cultural pocket, if you will. I'm sure people in Seattle have said such things, but I can't imagine people in my circle saying that. And then Karichi says, I wonder if it's the fact that here it is much more conservative and less open-minded in general. Yeah, absolutely. The Prince of Dorkness says, I cheated once. I had been with someone for about 5 years and discovered that they had been cheating for the entirety of our relationship. Well, that's rough. I cheated because I wanted to hurt them. I wanted them to feel something close to what I felt. Truth be told, the only reason I regret it is because I lowered myself to do what I did. But I will never regret how I made him feel. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but the trauma of finding out that your spouse of several years was never at any point loyal to you, that cuts deeper. Yeah, that's rough. To be cheated on for even just once, let alone a 5-year relationship, is rough. I mean, it is. I've worked with a lot of clients, maybe not to that extent, so that says something, but I've worked with people who were cheated on for a few years, and it's a lifetime of trauma, because that deception, that questioning, right? It's one thing to be cheated on once and then say a few months later you find out, or you're cheated on once and 10 years later you find out. But it's another thing to find out that for years, day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year in, year out, every moment, every I love you got from your partner, every kiss you got from, every time you had sex with your partner, every time that you smiled and laughed together, every time that you accommodated them in a fight, every time that they asked for a favor, every time that they said, sorry, I'm going to be late for work, every time they said, sorry, I can't have sex today because I'm not in the mood or something, every single moment gets called into question. Every moment. And perhaps the most important relationship you've ever had in your life. It just completely throws your world upside down. You're like, so I'm either an idiot or everyone is narcissistic and psychopathic. I mean, how could you do that to me? How could you just, again, it's one thing to cheat and then you're guilty and, 3 months later you tell them, it's another thing to just do it for so long with several women, with several people. It's a mind screw. But then you say, maybe that makes, so then you cheated to get back at him, and you're saying you don't regret that other than the fact that you stooped to his level, and maybe that makes you a bad person. It makes you, I don't know, bad or good, but if I were your friend and you were pre-cheating, I wouldn't recommend doing that because it's, well, I don't know. I guess the question would be, did it enhance your life somehow? Because in terms of fairness, I don't think a lot of people are going to fault you for that. I'm just of a principle that if we follow a guideline that allows for tit for tat or eye for an eye or two wrongs make a right, then I don't know, I feel like we've lost somehow something. As a principle, I would recommend that we follow our kindergarten teacher's advice, which is two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't mean that you're wrong, like your partner was. And certainly you're not going to get certainly he's not going to get a lot of sympathy like, oh my God, I can't believe that they cheated on you, even though he cheated for 5 years, but I don't know, maybe it did help. Maybe it was just like some liberation that you had, some sense of freedom. I don't know. It's complicated, but I just think that there's other ways. Like if I were your therapist, for example, of course I wouldn't tell you what to do and I wouldn't judge you, but I would suggest that obviously you take care of yourself. Obviously you do what you need to do to draw boundaries. Prior to cheating, you're just like, I'm thinking about cheating to get back at him. And I would say, well, what need are you trying to meet? Is it a sense of revenge? Is it a sense of liberation? Is it a sense of equality? Is it a sense of fairness? What is that? Because there are probably other methods that won't be complicated in the future, that won't be potentially self-destructive, that won't be playing into stooping to their level, for example. When people take the high road, I don't know, and it can be very self-satisfying to take the high road, especially long term. 5 years later, you're just like, at the time it really felt just for me to do that to him. But, I'm glad I actually took the high road because I can look back and say that there's nothing that I did that within reason I would say that I did wrong or that reflects on my behavior or my character in any sort of way. And just imagine to the guy that you cheated on if you did take the high road. I mean, that is kind of a revenge of a sense, right? To say to him, just like, look, I thought about cheating on you to get back at you, but you know what? I'm a better person than that. Clearly you're not. I don't know. That would be a zinger. Love is Blind number 5, Ness says, my problem with the Micah and Paul scene, so this is when Micah pressured Paul to break up with Amber. My problem with the Micah and Paul scene is that she pressured Kwame to prioritize her over Chelsea earlier by saying their connection is strong with Kwame and she can 100% see her future with him. Yeah, so I think what Ness is saying is that, look, Micah pressured Kwame to put Micah first on his list and then later broke up with Kwame and then pressured Paul to put her first. And I know people have ideas as to why that would be. A common hypothesis is that she's not there in a serious manner and or she just wants people to like her and or she's just competing with the other women in the pods. And she's a shallow, selfish, insecure bully who is harming people all around her, and she doesn't care. So that's one perspective. Certainly could be true. So actually, full disclosure, right now it's Saturday, April 15th. Hey, it's tax day. in the United States. And so I just saw the weddings yesterday, and I made a bunch of reaction videos to it. I haven't edited them yet. I have to edit them. I've also been watching a fair amount of Darcy and Stacey, and I have to edit that too. But anyway, so I've watched the end. I haven't seen the reunion, the live reunion, which is tomorrow on Sunday. You'll see this video probably on Sunday or Monday. And I know how this all ends, but at least in terms of the weddings, but as I read these comments, they're based on comments that for the commenter and for me, we didn't know the end. So I'm going to try to live in that space that I was in the very beginning of the season, if that makes any sense, and just kind of keep the comments to that, because otherwise I feel like I'd get confused as to what's happening. Anyway, so there are a lot of theories as to why Micah is the way that she is, even a lot of theories back then. And that's certainly a possibility that Micah didn't really care. Even after watching the weddings, you might be able to conclude that. It's hard to know. But there's also a possibility that Micah, in her version, whatever that is, had feelings for Kwame in the beginning, and Paul was a second, and then, as she said, a slow burn happened, and then she realized, actually, I think I love Paul, or I really like Paul more than I like Kwame. You know, that happens. If you look at it through a certain lens and you don't like Micah, then it looks nefarious. If you don't have that lens, then you just think, well, you know, sometimes you change your mind, or things change over time. Or plus, I wish they would put a little title saying what day of the pods it was, because if, for example, day 2 or 3, she's thinking, well, I think Kwame's my number one. And the other thing is it would be in your best interest to try to pressure your number one to make you number one, or not pressure, but to alert them. To say, hey, by the way, you're my number one. So if I'm close to your number one, I want you to be free to put me as your number one. You know, like, so can we lock this in? Love is Blind number 7, Mrs. Brown says, Dr. Honda, how many years did it take for you to feel like you know what you're doing as a therapist? I'm a therapist, and I just can't wait for my day to come where I feel confident. Yeah, so in graduate school, I remember hearing that it would take me 5 years, it would take all of us 5 years after graduation to feel confident about being a therapist. And I thought that was ridiculous, because why would it take 5 years? Certainly after graduation or shortly after, I should feel confident about this job, right? But lo and behold, I did not feel confident after graduation. And then at a certain point, I remember I was driving my car, and suddenly I just felt confident. Overall, I felt like I'd crossed some sort of threshold or gotten over the hill. And I remembered that professor saying it would take 5 years. And then I did the mental calculation. Yeah, it's 5 years, actually. I mean, it wasn't exactly on the dot, but it was around there. And I thought, Now, of course, not every therapist is exactly at 5 years, but it does highlight just how hard it is to be a therapist. It's extremely hard. It's very complicated, infinitely complicated, really. And there's not a lot of indication that you're doing good work, because it takes a long time for people to change. Also, at the beginning of your career, you tend to have a lot of difficult clients as opposed to later. So it's not uncommon to have your entire caseload get worse over time because their life is impacted by so many other factors like poverty and extreme mental illness, systemic problems, oppression. All right, so getting back to Love is Blind, number 7, this is when Micah breaks up with Kwame. Emma says, perhaps Micah is struggling to empathize with Kwame because she can't see him, because they're in the pods, and she misreads Kwame so badly that he convinced her with his diplomatic response, which was clearly covering up a lot of hurt for him. Could she actually think he was fine and therefore never really liked her? End of comment. Yeah, that is a possible factor. It doesn't really make entire sense, because most people in that scenario, without seeing someone, because we only see little snippets of what they were talking about. And Kwame and Micah had on camera some pretty explicit conversations about spending the rest of their lives together, okay? And we're just going to take a guess and say that there was a lot more content that we weren't provided on the show that had even, other conversations along those lines. So most people would intuit that there's going to be a lot of pain. But given Micah's issues, given the way that Kwame responded that way, but I don't know, even the way that Kwame responded in a very diplomatic response, to me, that even made it seem more apparent that Kwame was sad and hurt. because it was so abrupt and so notable the way that he responded, right? To go from, I'm in love with you, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, I feel so connected to you, to, okay, well, see ya, it shouldn't take much to intuit. Now, I'm not saying we're supposed to bully Micah. I'm not saying that Micah is some sort of jerk face necessarily. I'm just saying, I don't know. Micah is actually, full disclosure, I don't really have a clear idea as to why Micah is Micah. Irina, I have a better foundation to build some hypotheses around. Of course, I can't know if any of it is correct, but I feel more satisfied with some of the eventual hypotheses that I build around Irina. But Micah, I just never really, I guess you could just draw a really simple conclusion that she's immature and she's naive and she's still developing her empathy or understanding of how other people work or something, finding herself. Honestly, that is the hypothesis that I eventually felt somewhat satisfied with, was that Micah does not really know who she is and has been through some things early in life that resulted in her not knowing who she is. Not necessarily trauma or abuse, but a lack of attunement or something, or stress in the family, divorce. I don't know. It's hard to feel really satisfied with it, but it would explain why she seems to chameleonize herself with other people, perhaps as a way of just because she doesn't know who she is, and so she just adopts what other people are doing around her. I don't know. All right, Love is Blind number 8. This is when Paul broke up with Amber. Cece says, Micah, the self-declared empath, is surprised that Amber has feelings. Right. FK says, to me, this is the most pure space on the internet watching Dr. Honda. It breaks my heart a bit when Dr. Honda, who sees the good in people and shows empathy in such a high level, starts to slowly get his spirit broken with people's behavior. Yeah, I don't know if FK is being serious about my spirit being broken, but, and again, maybe it's just someone having empathy for me, but I'll tell you that things that break my spirit are not the sort of things on the show. Certainly when I'm watching the show, it's hard and cringeworthy and gives me pain, but I would like to think that the priority in my spirit and soul is such that things like governments that are killing each other today, right now, that we have racism and classism and all sorts of oppression, sexism in our society, and we have climate change and governments and people who ignore it and don't care. Meanwhile, the oppressed people of the world become more oppressed, become more disenfranchised because of climate change, because of the wealthy becoming more wealthy and the poor becoming more poor. Those things have the potential to break my spirit, not Micah and Irina being jerk faces. But yeah, it is hard. The other thing that you say here, FK, is that I show empathy on such a high level. So people will say that about me, and obviously that makes me feel good, but I actually don't believe that to be true. The empathy that I provide, I think everyone is capable of providing. I don't think that I'm an anomaly. There's nothing different about me. I'm not a different human. I'm just like everyone else. I just focus on certain things. I also, as a living, emphasize certain parts of my personality. My point is that I challenge the idea that there's something different about me. There might be something different about my behavior, but I don't think there's something different about me. So I want everyone to believe that in yourself and the people around you all have the capacity to have as much empathy as whatever you see in me or in yourself, perhaps more empathy. That's my experience. Even with people like Irina and Micah, when I really get to know people like that, and that's the glory of being a therapist, is you really get to know people. When I see bad behavior in politicians, in people on reality TV, I just know, because I've lived it so many times as a therapist, that that person has a rich backstory, one that if I knew, I would understand why they did what they did. I wouldn't necessarily think it was justified, of course, but I would say, oh, okay, you know what? I can see how someone would become so defended, so hurt, so triggered, so distorted that they would do something like that and feel not only like it's okay, but they are actually the right one. You know, when you see these videos of people screaming at each other and everyone's laughing like, oh, look at that woman asking for the manager, and we ridicule this person, the conclusion usually is just like that person's entitled, that sort of thing. And certainly that could be a factor, but that's almost never the real reason as to why people are doing things like that. There's a lot of trauma in the world. There's a lot of trauma. But yeah, watching Micah and Irina can be crushing sometimes. Love is Blind number 9. Risa says, what are your thoughts on the take that Micah and Irina were motivated by beating and competing with other women, i.e. Micah was less interested in Paul until he got Amber flowers, and Irina pursued Zach so intensely because she wanted to beat Bliss? Yeah, it could be. It could be a factor. Hard to know. It certainly would be consistent with other behaviors. I mean, the kinds of stuff we saw in the pods from Micah and Irina and at the pool, those two scenes, was extreme. I mean, the amount of immaturity. I recently rewatched that scene where Irina is spying on Amber as Amber is crying. And I just thought, I mean, even if I saw a 13-year-old doing that, I would be mortified. I'd just be like, oh my God, why and what? And do you not have a heart, or what's wrong? What's going on there? So yeah, in light of all the other behavior, is it possible that a factor was that they were like, well, Micah's thinking, I'm better than Amber. I mean, look at her. And so I'm going to get him to like me. Unconsciously, consciously, I don't know. I hate to say that. You know, when I watch shows like this, people will often assume these kinds of perspectives. And of course, I can never know. But I usually don't even entertain those because that's not usually the case in my experience. But, you know, given everything else we saw, could be. Love is Blind number 10. This is when Tiffany fell asleep on Brett. WHT says, I have been stunned by the response of the internet, especially men, to Tiffany falling asleep. Just chiming in here. Interesting. So what this person is saying is that men were getting angry at Tiffany for falling asleep on Brett, maybe very angry or something, which is interesting. So I have been stunned by the response of the internet, especially men, to Tiffany falling asleep. They've eaten, they've been drinking, the people in the pods, like Tiffany, have eaten, they've been drinking, talking for hours, and God knows what time it is. And she's over 35, people. All my friends laughed at this part because we know what it's like. And we were really disturbed by how many people take this as an epic disrespect. Adults are tired. Girl just got sleepy. Chill out. Yeah, well, maybe as they watch the show, Tiffany redeemed herself in people's eyes. But yeah, I will say that when I was watching and Tiffany was first falling asleep, I did have, not as a harsh of a reaction like this of just like, oh, Tiffany, don't, what do you do? But then when I thought about it just a half a second longer, I was just like, oh yeah, like you say, eating, they've been eating a lot of food, they've been drinking, they've been talking for hours. And as I said in the reaction video, she's on a really comfortable couch. She has a nice warm blanket. God knows what time it is. She's over 35. He's talking in a very calm way. He has a very soothing voice. She feels really safe, and she, nods off. It's extremely understandable. And of course, Tiffany was mortified and very apologetic, and Brett seemed to take it well. Love is Blind, number 11. Angela says, when you said anger does not mean danger, that unraveled so much for me. Yeah, so I was talking about how some people will equate anger with danger because that was the association that was usually correct when they were young, being abused or being emotionally abused or something. And for these people, if they have a partner who is angry, even though there's no history or no indication of aggression or violence or dominance or abuse, the person with the trauma will assume that danger is present, that something bad is going to happen to them, even though the partner is just angry. And so I was wondering that when Marshall was getting angry at Josh, that Jackie interpreted that as a very dangerous situation, and she got overwhelmed, and that's why she left, and she was crying on the couch for so long. And I've worked with many clients on this issue. There's a lot of people as adults who just automatically assume that when their partner is angry at anything, that very bad things are about to happen, even though there's no history of your partner actually creating any dangerous situation. Anger is an emotion. Anger is good. Anger means that you recognize an injustice, and lots of injustices happen, not only in our personal lives, but in the political sphere and the societal sphere. So if you're not regularly angry, there's something wrong. You're either not paying attention or you're suppressing your anger, which is likely. So we want to embrace anger. What we don't want to do is say anger gives you the right to do whatever you want to other people, of course, which makes no sense. So Angela says, when you said anger does not mean danger, that unraveled so much for me. Growing up, my dad used to punish me for being emotional. I grew up thinking emotions were never good. This was extremely eye-opening when you said that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. Therapy can help further that. Obviously, therapy can help further that understanding. And there's so many things about emotions that we know intellectually, but don't really know. Like for you, Angela, I'm guessing you already knew that people could get angry without it resulting in a dangerous situation. But your body didn't necessarily know that, right? And so your body will feel that way and then will interpret things like, well, I saw that one thing, and so that indicated that clearly he was going to do this. Or, you'll have a way of convincing the self to agree with the way you feel. And so that's where therapy comes in, to really kind of sift through those things. And of course, corrective experiences will help so you don't have that reactivity anymore. I mean, one of the most important things I do in couple therapy is helping couples to have one person get angry and the other person is present and not afraid. And because often when the person is, say that, you have a husband that's angry at his wife because his feelings are hurt, and he's like, I can't believe you did this to me again. We met up with your family and you just ignored me again. You did that again, and it's hurtful, depending on how he's coming across, because it could be intimidating, but in the way I role played it, I could imagine someone being like that. And then in a heterosexual relationship, the wife, for her to stay present and say, yeah, I hear you. Even though in the back of her mind, she might be like bracing herself of, is he going to swing at me, or is this going to escalate or something? Because there's a lot of messaging around suppression of anger, like don't be angry or don't be sad, don't cry, everything's going to be okay. And when you do that to people, it hurts. It gets them more hurt and more angry. So if you just attune, you're just like, yeah, I get it. I could see why you're angry. It was unfair. I don't know. I don't know why I do that. Let's talk about it. I'm sorry. People almost always instantly dissipate their anger. They're just not angry anymore because they're emphasizing things because they want to be heard. They want to be understood. And then once they feel understood and heard, there's no reason to be angry anymore. They're like, okay, I don't have to a common scenario is someone will say something like, the other day you ignored me when we were with your family. No, I didn't. And then this person, what do? They either have to just give up and resent and drift away, or they have to elevate it. They got to take it up a notch of they start accusing, well, yes, you did. You do this all the time. Okay, so they're escalating, trying to say, I know because you've done this before. And then this person says, no, I don't. I never do it. Okay, so you either suppress and get resentful and fall out of love, or you escalate again. And sometimes that results in people getting more expressive and also getting more frustrated. And so a lot of times the anger is just a result of this person getting defensive. If you aren't defensive and you listen, the person doesn't need to get angry to get their point across. Case by case basis, it's not always the case. Certainly there are people who are abusive regardless of what you do. But so yes, anger doesn't mean danger. And for yourself, really cultivate your anger. Get a hold of it. Don't reject it. I've worked with people, a lot of women, honestly, because there's a lot of suppression of anger in women. I've worked with a lot of people on getting to know your anger and feeling your anger and embracing your anger and cultivating your anger and directing your anger, harnessing your anger, galvanizing your anger, expressing your anger. There's a lot to be angry about. And if anger is not a healthy, rich part of your life, then it's probably coming out in other directions. There's probably something going wrong in your somatic life, your body, health symptoms, or drinking a lot, or smoking a lot of pot, or avoidance, or something. When you suppress your anger, bad things happen, including being depressed. A lot of people are depressed because they don't know where to direct their anger. They feel demoralized, and the body just wants to shut down. So anger is very healthy, very important. And when your partner is angry, value that as well. It's okay that they're angry, unless they're being abusive. Then that's not okay, obviously. Love is Blind number 12. Chelsea says, I think Zach was going to choose Bliss initially and not Irina. The reason why he ended up choosing Irina instead is because he felt a bit attacked when Bliss questioned his character. It turned him off and made him defensive. Plus, once Bliss started exposing Irina's negativity to him, instead of taking it for what it was, it brought him back to when his mom was being misjudged by others. And also, Bliss talked about how her family never approves of the men she dates after he already told her about being rejected for not being good enough for his previous girlfriend and fiance. End of comment. Yeah, those are great points. I didn't think of that at the time. So there was a few other people that were saying similar things. I just wanted to highlight that. That's a good theory. I didn't pick up on that at the time. Olivia says, I feel like Irina probably went through a lot of bullying when she was in school. Yeah, I mean, who knows, but seems likely. She did mention being picked on for her acne. I think Irina probably identified Micah as a bully early on and latched onto her for protection. It's possible that in her experience, if you're not the bully, then you're the target. When Micah is around, she plays up the meanness to prove whose side that she is on. Yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought of that. That for Irina, she has this model of understanding of you're either the bully or you're the bullied. And a lot of bullies will think that way. And because based on their experience, a lot of bullies were previously bullied. And so for them, they're like, well, I better find the bully so that I don't get bullied. And also the bully will protect me from the other bullies or whatever. And who knows, but you can imagine Irina, you just imagine how weird it is when the 15 of them enter the pods, the women on the women's side and the men on the men, and how you're just looking around just like, okay, who are you? What's going on? And then you slowly start to build alliances and friendships, and how it would bring everyone back to middle school, because that's maybe the last time something like that happened. Ruth Ann says, I don't know, personally, I think Irina looks bored. Oh, so this is when Jackie is crying on the couch and Irina is taking care of Jackie. I was putting forth that it looks like Irina has the capacity not only for empathy, but tremendous empathy. Really being there, eye contact, listening, very compassionate face. And then all of a sudden Micah walks in and she starts laughing. So Ruth Ann disagrees, says, I don't know. Personally, I think Irina looks bored when she's taking care of Jackie and like she's wanting to escape the situation at the beginning of the clip. So I don't think there was a shift when Micah comes in. Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right, Ruth Ann. I can't tell. I'd like to believe that Irina was legit having empathy and caring about her. Love is Blind number 13. WTF What says, I'm just really into the idea that the simple use of the word poot would unlock a sentimental memory for you. Haha. Yeah. I don't even remember who said poot. I honestly don't remember who said that. But yeah, it did unlock a lot of, actually not just that sentimental memory, but my brother-in-law actually has been using the word, I don't know if he still does, but he would use the word poot a lot when I was a kid. And it reminds me of him, and he's a funny guy. So Love is Blind number 14. This is the one where Zach and Irina are talking in the pods, and Zach proposes that he thinks that Irina has some pain, some trauma, some insecurity, and Irina starts to cry quietly. Now, Natalia says, well, I'm crying too now after watching this. Hearing Dr. Honda give the example of Stephanie immigrating at 8 years old. So remember Stephanie, the fart jar, the poot jar person? I'm not making fun of her. That's literally her business, which good for her. Hearing Dr. Hanna give the example of Stephanie immigrating at 8 years old and feeling ostracized, I realize that's exactly what happened to me, and I guess I've never dealt with it. I immigrated at 7 years old from Russia to Israel, where I didn't know the language and was constantly bullied, and then again at 14, moving to Canada. I never realized it had such a big impact on me emotionally until I heard him talk about this example. Wow, thank you, Dr. Honda. Yeah, I'm sorry you went through that, Natalia. It's something that is not often thought about when people make these kinds of moves, even if you make a move within your own country to a similar culture. It's very disorienting. There's a lot of ostracization. Yeah, it's rough. And it's something that can require a lot of therapy. I've had clients where literally the only thing they came in to talk with me about was this issue, because it's rough. People often think, well, it's just school, who cares, moving on in life. No, You can almost think of, for children, they basically have two spheres of attachment and socializing, and that's at home and that's at school. And school is just as important, sometimes even more important than home. I mean, I don't know if I want to say that, but at the very least, just as important. Kids spend a lot of time at school, hours and hours and hours throughout the year. And there's a lot of emotional things that are happening. There's a lot of attachments. There's a lot of growth and development and learning about yourself. So it's an important venue, important milieu for development, and obviously has the potential to really harm people if not managed right. Love is Blind, number 15. Olugbuye says, I don't think Zach's mom was vicious or uncaring. He never talks about her that way. Never is. Okay. So I'm guessing what I might have been saying was, who knows, maybe Zach is attracted to Irina because his mom had some issues similar to Irina, maybe maliciousness. I certainly would never say I know for sure that I knew that, and I would probably couch that as saying I have no idea, and I would not want to speak ill about someone, particularly in that position. I don't know about Zach, of course. I can't really tell, but we can look at what he did say about his mom. And the things that he said about his mom were very kind, very loving, indicating that he missed her. And, things are complicated. So the fact that he didn't say anything negative about her doesn't mean she didn't have negative qualities. He could be not emphasizing those negative qualities because he just doesn't want to get into it. He could also not be wanting to, besmirch her memory. He could also still be struggling with the loss. There's a lot of reasons as to why he might not mention those things, even though those things might have been there. I obviously don't know. Maybe she was a saint. But given the things that he talked about in terms of the history of the family and of his mom, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some rough edges there. So I don't know. I obviously can't know. It's a long shot. It's just speculative. But just the fact that he never talked about her in a negative light does not mean that the mom didn't have negative qualities. And it's another thing to think about when we lose people, like a parent, that it's really complicated. One of the things that bothers me when I go to memorials, everyone's complicated, right? So when someone dies and people go up to the podium and speak about their loved one, people can do what they want to do. But sometimes, especially when I know the person really well and all I hear, and I know that the person had some negative qualities, and all I hear from people at the podium is just how perfect they were and how saintly they were, that almost feels disrespectful to me. Like for me, when I die, I don't want people just to get up there and talk about all the good things. I don't know. I just feel like if you're going to remember me, remember me, not some fake version of me. Remember the me in the me. So I feel like the people who are close to me who die and that happens, I feel like they wouldn't like that. I feel like they would say like, well, you're painting me like I was a saint. It all throws everything into question if all you say is positives. Like when I think about my loved ones today who are still alive, I recognize their good qualities, 97% good. There's 3% that is annoying. The closer you get to someone, here's the thing. If you're not annoyed with your loved ones, you're not close enough. That's just the bottom line. You're not close enough. There's no way that you could be close to someone, really legitimately close, and not be supremely annoyed with them sometimes. It's normal. That's the deal. So when we're honoring someone's memory and we're honoring our relationship with someone, I don't appreciate just always saying nice. Everyone can do what they want to do. Also, there's a lot of complications, right? Because if you miss the person and you feel bad or you feel guilty that you didn't spend more time with them or whatever, you might feel bad recognizing the bad of the person. Also, there's a lot of oppression. If Zach were to talk ill of his mom and mention anything negative, I'm guessing the internet would have come down on him as a disrespectful kid, which is not okay. So I don't know. I'm not reading into it at all. We didn't really hear much about his mom, and the mom was referenced quite a bit, but not a lot of detail as to what the relationship was like or what happened. But the fact that he never said anything negative about her doesn't mean that there wasn't something negative about her. Love is Blind, number 16. This is when he calls him a cartoon and he's creepy when they meet Irina and Zach. Cameron says, given Irina's insecurity about her skin, I could see the staring making her very insecure, and then she defaults to mean comments. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That could be a thing. Absolutely. That when she was younger, when staring happened, it was because they were staring at her acne. and then bullying would follow or something. And so you could also imagine that she would wake up in the morning, look at herself in the mirror, and because of bullying and ostracization, she's just like, I just hope no one looks at me. I just want to be invisible. I just hope that no one will look at me. So eye contact, looking at her in that extreme situation, you could see how she would kick into that point of view and that distortion and that reactivity. All right, Love is Blind 17. So this is when they're at the honeymoon. Maria says, thank you for, so this is when Irina and Zach were on the beach having a meal, and there was a lot of jokiness from Irina, a lot of making jokes. I mean, looking back, it seems as though Irina was uncomfortable because she wasn't really attracted to Zach, but at the time we didn't really know that. And so, or at least I didn't. Maria says, thank you for breaking this down, Doctor. So I was breaking down how people use jokiness as a way of diffusing, which will push people away and deny the self the ability to be real and authentic. Maria says, not that joking is bad, but if that's all you do, even in intimate conversations, it can be self-destructive. Maria says, thank you for breaking this down, Dr. Kirk. It made me realize just how often I use jokes and playfulness to diffuse a situation that is too real or too deep for me. I react similarly when given a compliment. I will make a joke. I really see a lot of my own reactions in Irina's. Yeah, well, I'm glad, Maria, that you can see that. Jokiness is fine. I joke around all the time, but there are moments when it's motivated by anxiety and uncertainty and worries of rejection, and it feels in the moment safer to make a joke than to be authentic and real, which denies you the opportunity to be authentic and real and to actually get your needs met. And as I said, it pushes people away. When someone compliments you and you make a joke, when someone invites you into an affectionate, real, authentic, genuine conversation and you make a joke, they don't want to do that with you anymore, and they think that you don't care. They think that you're being flippant, and it pushes them away. Mac says, what you said about using playful rejection as a way to distance yourself from vulnerability really hits home to me. I do this all the time. Playful rejection is essentially my entire personality. I think it's partially cultural, but I also know that I deeply fear being known by others, and it made me realize by watching this that it's likely connected. Yeah. We all deserve to be genuine and be real and to get our needs met. It's just about getting our needs met. Sometimes we have a need for laughter and lightness, and sometimes we have a need for depth and understanding and connection and realness. All right, Love is Blind number 18. This is when Jackie cried a lot in the bathroom at the honeymoon. Koob says, what a lot of people may not realize is that it can feel really painful to receive this kind of tender care from Marshall when you've lived a life of abuse. You suddenly realize what you've been missing all along and the way you should have been treated. It can make you feel angry and confused, and it can be very disorienting. Like living in a locked room your whole life and suddenly being exposed to the outside world. In one sense, you may be grateful, but also furious that you didn't have access to it sooner. Yeah, that is an excellent point, and I've seen that a lot. That it mostly happens in couples that I'm treating, where I will be treating a couple with years and years of resentment and distance and conflict and almost no constructive communication, a lot of avoidance. Like at best, they avoid talking about things, and at worst, they're screaming at each other saying they want to get a divorce. And so when I finally get them to a place where one person is actually listening with empathy, and it might not be perfect, but it's definitely in the right direction, at least according to me watching it, the person receiving the empathy will sometimes have a very strange reaction. You would think because often the person receiving the empathy has been wanting it for a long time and maybe even explicitly asking for it, maybe even asking me to explicitly get their partner to exhibit it. When it finally arrives, sometimes that person receiving the empathy will become very upset and angry. Let's say I don't know, there'll be very severe reactions, but it won't be like, thank you for giving me empathy. And in the beginning of my career, I was confused by it. I was like, I don't understand what's happening. Over time, I realized this was likely the case. And sometimes I'll even say that. It's about, okay, I just want to stop you. I'm guessing what's happening is that you've had a lifetime, not only with your partner, but prior to your partner, of almost no one, perhaps no one, giving you empathy and grace and really caring about you, being attuned to you. And so you have a lot of anger about that, a lot of trauma, a lot of upsetness. And when we finally got your partner to start to exhibit that, for you, it's an overwhelming experience because it feels good, but it reminds you, you're seeing something that you've longed for, that you may have given up on years and years ago. And seeing it being given to you right now, you're suddenly very acutely aware of an entire lifetime of being denied that. And obviously that's going to hurt and make you really angry. And so that's the response that you're going to have, which I get. And so let's honor that, and let's have that. Let's live with that. And also maybe couch that for a second so that you can acknowledge that your partner is giving you empathy in this moment, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's complicated. All right, Love is Blind number 19. This is when Zach and Irina talk in bed. This is the first time they're in bed, not the second time at the end of the honeymoon. Amanda says, I would say if we compare and contrast Zach and Irina with Jessica and Mark from season 1, or even Shake and Deepti, or Sal and Mal, I personally think Zach and Irina do a much better job with listening to each other and honestly figuring things out together. I remember Mark really pressuring Jessica much more than Zach does to Irina on their honeymoon. Also, I recall Mal was so much more confusing with really mixed signals, at least on camera. Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we see the full story of Zach and Irina at the honeymoon. Yeah, I really was not only just personally satisfied, I think I mentioned in the reaction video, of just like, oh, thank God we don't have to watch these two act like they like each other like I think we have in the past. And yeah, especially Sal and Mal. I don't know what it was about those two, but those two pretty early on in the honeymoon, maybe even as soon as they met in person, I just felt like I do not think Mal likes him. I just don't think. And I think that they've talked about it and they're not talking about it in front of the cameras. There's just something really off. Now, of course, I can't tell, and I would never claim to read people's minds, but it was frustrating because there was a chance that it was legit. There was a chance they were going to say yes at the altar. So I had to continue to watch, and when it turned out that they said no, it's like, okay. But even when they said no, the explanation didn't make any sense to me, because Sal said no to Mal. The storyline was Mal got rejected by Sal. And I don't know, I could never tell. But yeah, at the very least, there was a lot more overt, very obvious, when Irina starts to exhibit that she's not attracted to Zach, at least there wasn't a lot of mixed signaling, like Irina saying things to the camera like, yeah, I feel love. I mean, if you watch those previous seasons, there's a lot of talk from these people who, I don't know, when we look back, probably were not in love, especially once they met in person. There's a lot of footage of these people saying very overt things that they plan on spending the rest of their life with this person and they're in love and everything's fine. Irina never did that, to my memory, or at least maybe she did, but at least there was a theme of, it was clear that something was up. And the fact that they ended up at the end of the honeymoon calling it quits is very commendable, not only because good for them for being honest and not being shady and fake, but also for us as the viewer. Also for Zach and Bliss, right? All right, Love is Blind 23. This was, let's have a shot for a failed proposal. Kendra says, wow, seeing Dr. Honda so viscerally perturbed by Micah and Irina's behavior really says something to me. And I'm glad, because this shit is so triggering for me, as I was bullied in middle school and high school by girls who acted very similarly to these women. I'm glad the majority of viewers are ridiculing their behavior because it is unacceptable. Yeah, I can imagine this being very vindicating for a lot of victims of bullying. Watching this, and not only because when you're being bullied, often it's just you and the bullies, and no one wants to come to your aid because they don't want to get bullied as well or something. Or maybe you have a couple friends, but you're alone and you think, does no one else care? You might have even gone to teachers or other friends or your parents and no one really did anything. And so you feel probably like, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe this is okay, or maybe they're the cool kids, or maybe I'm too sensitive. And then you watch a show like this and seemingly universally people are like, oh my God, Micah and Irina's behavior is awful. As a victim of someone like Micah and Irina when you're younger, yeah, I could imagine that being very satisfying. There was this guy who very briefly bullied me. He was an older guy in my school that I didn't know, but I was walking home in the winter and my feet were very cold. The trend at the time was not to wear socks, and so my feet were numb. So I'm walking home from school, and he's just walking this way. We never interacted before. And he just walks up to me and stomps as hard as he could on my foot, and then pushes me down, and then just walks off. And I'm like, what was that about? I get home, and when my foot warms up and I get the feeling back, I have this tremendous pain in my toe, and I look down, and my toenail, it's all wonky, and I start kind of messing with it, and the whole toenail just comes off. My toenail has just never been the same ever since. Anyway, so it was bothersome, and it was humiliating, it was hurtful, caused permanent damage. Now, I was a pretty big kid, so I didn't usually feel afraid of people, and it was a pretty brief moment. But anyway, it bugged me, and I never had satisfaction. I never had a confrontation with him or anything. Years later, I guess 10 years later, I'm at a bar in college, and I see him. And I see him with all of his friends, the older kids in my school. And I've had a couple drinks, and so I'm like, I'm going to go over there and mess him up. Because he's smaller than me. I've grown even larger, and he's stayed the same height, so, I could take him. I go over there, and he's, I think, playing foosball with his friends, and I go up to him and I say, hey, you remember me? And he's like, no. And I'm like, well, this is what happened. And I thought that he would take a swing at me or he'd start yelling at me. I told my friends, if the 8 of them start doing something to me, please help. I don't know if they would have, but, and by the way, I don't recommend, obviously, physical violence, but, I was 21, what are you going to do? So I walk up to him and I said, this, and I'm pretty stern, but I'm not really picking a fight. I'm more just like, you did this thing to me, and why? And it was bullshit. And to my surprise, the guy who bullied me, he just kind of looked down at his feet. And then his friends looked at him and were like, did you really do that to him? Why would you do that to him? How could you do that to him? And I was stunned, because I thought, no, not my wildest dreams would I think that would be the reaction, like actual shame, no anger, and then the friends actually kind of sticking up for me in a sense. And I thought, And then I basically kind of stuck around for a couple other seconds and nothing else happened, and I just walked away. And boy, was that satisfying. It felt like closure, So for you, Kendra, watching this behavior, and then seeing everyone's reactivity, including mine, does it provide you with some closure? Now, I will say they deserve no bullying. We could talk about them. You can comment on my videos. You can talk with your friends. Don't DM them. Don't comment on their videos unless it's a non-bullying sort of comment. There's no reason to go after them. Believe me, I'm pretty sure they understand that the world does not see them in a positive light. So you don't have to add to it, okay? Oksana says, am I the only one irritated by Kwame's laugh? It seems fake and it happens incongruently. I'm assuming it's nervous or a defensive habit. Would love to see Dr. Honda address this. Well, yeah, I don't know if I noticed the laugh, but as we go through the season, Kwame is very confusing to me. And I assume that he just is awkward or doesn't really feel comfortable in front of the cameras being affectionate. I don't know. Love is Blind number 24. Joe says, if I have learned anything from Love is Blind, anyone can make it through the pods, but it's the pool where things really go down. Yeah. M says, this is the video where Kwame goes to Micah and says, I can't believe that you said a shot for a failed proposal. Then it evolves into overt flirting between the two of them. M says, this is how I know Dr. Honda is a real one. He's not even black, and he immediately picked up on the possible explanation for her attitude is racism. It felt great to have this validated as a black. So I think I might have been saying that for Micah, it's possible that her lack of compassion towards Kwame with the shot, like, hey, let's toast to a failed proposal, that it might be because of racism, meaning that for some people, they might see black men in particular, I suppose, as not having tender emotions, not even being really human, and thus they don't deserve to be humanized. They don't deserve to be cared for. They don't deserve compassion. Certainly we understand that that can be a racist attitude. So I think that's what I was proposing as a possibility. Anyway, so M says, this is how I know Dr. Hana is a real one. He's not even black, and he immediately picked up on the possible explanation for her attitude could be racism. It felt great to have that validated as a black person, and frequently it's only us that are compelled to bring up racism when talking about interactions that are open to interpretation. It's almost like non-black people feel like it's a taboo to even bring up racism as a possible explanation for someone's behavior, or they completely overlook it because it's not even something they think about. It feels so invalidating that they don't even fathom racism as a possibility. Yeah, agreed. It is a problem, obviously. There's various different reasons for this, of course. One is ignorance. Another is willful ignorance by some people, white people, maybe particularly. Also, when you're privileged, you don't necessarily see your privilege. Also, when you have that much indoctrination into an idea that black people are not really human, or they're subhuman or something, or they don't deserve to be humanized, or they're invisible, or they're all criminals, all the stereotypes that are ridiculous. When you're fully indoctrinated into that point of view, then there's not really room for compassion. There's not really an opportunity to engage with your humanity towards another human in this way. So, there's a lot of that. There's also a lack of education, a lack of calm, wise discourse around it. If you go online, on Twitter in particular, and you try to have conversations about this sort of thing, it gets at hand pretty quickly and demoralizing. And in my world, as an academic and as a therapist, we have lots of conversations about racism. And I can't think of any conversation I've ever had in my life in the academic world and the therapy world about racism that went poorly. It's just having conversations and being real and understanding and listening to people and looking at the research and contemplating things and mulling things over, stretching yourself. It's all it is. It's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be screaming at each other or denying other people, And the other thing, that the way I teach it in my classes is that I introduce the philosophy that I have, that when it comes to any question of oppression, any contemplation of these forces at work in our lives that are causing destructive problems, is to raise questions that we may or may not have answers to. So the question is it possible that Micah, given her indoctrination into a racist culture, which is undeniable, that's just a fact, that's not a question, given that she has been indoctrinated into a racist culture, might that have played a role in mitigating her empathy or her understanding the situation for what it is, in that Kwame is really hurt and he was really crying and he was hurting a lot by the fact that Micah broke up with him. Is it possible that racism played a role in that? We don't know. We don't know. There'd be very little way to determine that unless Micah sat down with us and agreed that then we'll quite possibly. And even if Micah did agree, she wouldn't necessarily have the ability to zero in on that factor, because where do you find that fact? It's not a concrete thing. It'd be hard to know. But when in psychology and in therapy we are dealing with these things, the fact that we don't know the answer doesn't mean we don't raise the question. It also means we don't answer the question definitively. So it's a matter of questions. Is it possible? So if Micah were to come to me and say, I think something went wrong there. Why did I have a lack of empathy for Kwame? Well, I would raise a lot of questions that we would never know the answer to. We would start to cobble together a model of understanding maybe why that happened, and then that would give us an idea of what to address and how to help her to change those things that caused that so that she won't do that in the future. And then we would test it out by trying to change those things, and then if her lack of empathy went away in those situations, or at least went down, then we would at least have an idea that we're addressing the right things. Like if we identified racism as a factor and we really worked on racism, and it would take perhaps years for Micah to really wrestle with that. It usually does. It's a lifetime of wrestling, really. And then over time, she finds herself maybe even watching the show and going 5 years later and thinking, oh my God, I see that through such a different lens now. At the time, I remember people thinking I might have been racist and thinking that's ridiculous. But now, 5 years later, after doing all this wrestling, I kind of look at that and think like, there might have been actually some racism in there. I mean, I'm not going to blame myself really because I was a part of my culture, but yeah, I think that might have been happening. Okay, then we might know by then that racism was a factor. But until then, it'd be hard to know. Micah would have to go along with that. So a lot of this is raising questions, and you might address the question, you might explore the question, you might think like, well, maybe let's address it anyway and try to help. So it's questions without answers often is my model, and that was probably what I was doing when it came to this situation. I don't even know if that's what I was saying about Micah. I could be thinking of a different scenario in terms of why I brought up the possibility of racism being a factor in these cast members' behavior. So yeah, it's upsetting, and I've seen it happen before in my own life. You'll see white people will cringe when you bring up racism. We're like, huh? I mean, the thing is that racism is a fact. Racism is a fact. It's studied by research, forwards and backwards. It's everywhere, and you can't escape it. And it's just a matter of life. It's like breathing air. There's no such thing as a non-racist, really, in my book, because we've all been indoctrinated into a culture of various different levels and aspects of racism, prejudice, and dehumanization. It's just in the air. You can't avoid it. The question is, what are you going to do about it? That's the question, not whether or not you're a racist or not. When people say, I'm not a racist, I'm like, of course I'm a racist. Everyone's a racist. We all have racist ideas, whatever you want. What is a racist, right? Well, I guess I would contend that a racist is someone who has racist attitudes. You can't not have racist attitudes. So it's not a matter of who's a racist and who's not a racist. It's what are you going to do with it? What are you going to do about it? Are you going to avoid it? Are you going to deny it? Or are you going to wrestle with it and admit it? Now, of course, that can mean a lot of different things, but that's the general attitude of people in my circle, in academia and in therapy, which is very different from, I think, the general discussions about these things. The other thing I'll say is that you're saying that, you say he's not even black, and he immediately picked up on the possible explanation of racism. Well, I want to remind people that I'm Asian. And so Asians experience a lot of racism. So I have been the victim of racism my entire life and still am. I'm half white, and I pass as white sometimes, but even in Seattle, I was at a four-way stop in Ballard, which is quite possibly one of the most liberal bastions in the world. I'm at a four-way stop, and I thought I got there first, and so I went, and the woman apparently thought that I shouldn't have gone first, even though we arrived at the intersection. I mean, I guess at the same time. Anyway, she got behind me, and I was at a stoplight. She got out of the car and was banging on my window. A young white woman banging on my window, called me a chink. So obviously, I don't pass as white, and obviously, and I could tell you numerous stories of racism. Assumptions about my skills. I won't go into detail, but I have a lot of pride in my abilities as a therapist and as a professor. I don't think that would be lost on people watching this channel. I would be pigeonholed by people at my university as and they wouldn't say it overtly, but they would pigeonhole me as the professor who's valued, who we value at the university because he's good with computers. I mean, on average, I guess I'm probably, particularly compared to at that earlier stage of my academic career, all the professors were in their 60s and 70s, and I'm in my 30s. And so by definition of age, I guess I was better at computers. But it was, so at first I thought it was fine, but over time it became like, oh, I think I'm being treated this way because I'm Asian. And I would like to be valued for what I value, which is being a professor and being a therapist and all the things that, and I mean, just imagine just being pigeonholed like that, just being reduced as that's your value. And for those of you who have experienced stereotyping and racism, you know what I'm talking about. Or sexism, oh, that woman, she's so great because she's so nurturing or something like that. It's okay, great, nurturing, but I'm more than that. I want to be, I know I'm more than that. And so that kind of thing, it's subtle and it hurts and it's limiting and it sticks with you. Yeah, so the fact that I, as an Asian American who has family who were literally imprisoned during World War II, even though they were American citizens because they were Japanese Americans, and have experienced a lifetime of being called names and experienced stereotyping and experienced racism against me. I've had people close to me be racist against me, white people, who will just say like, well, you're basically white. And I'm like, what? Well, yeah, you're not really a person of color. You're basically white. Okay, well, it depends on what your definition is, but what are you saying? Well, you're just like us. You're just like white people. One, I don't want to be like you, so fuck off. I want to be me. I want to be my identity. So you're not making me feel better by saying I'm not me. Two, so because you aren't there when I'm being treated in racist ways means that it's not happening. And our country, to this day, has a history of completely denying the Asian experience in general. While I'm on this topic. So I read an article this morning that just came out, I think yesterday. People magazine interviewed the creator of Love is Blind. And the creator revealed that there were two other couples who made it. Maybe I'll do a video about this, but it's topical. So the other two couples, two of the women were Asian. They looked East Asian. I mean, I can't tell, but they looked East Asian to me. And so there was this question as to, okay, so you had 7 couples that became engaged, and the 2 couples that just happened to have an Asian in it, Asian American, were excised. Why? And there were comments and people wondering why. And what I'll say is, like, I don't propose that we assume that racism was at play. It could have been. It might not have been. The creator of the show, Love is Blind, said that they try to weed out people who are not authentic or who don't have an interesting story to tell. And you could say, well, do we not think Asians could tell interesting stories? By the way, Beef, the TV show on Netflix. Stacey and I have been watching several episodes tonight. It's great. Even if you're not an Asian, it is a wonderful it's one of the best TV shows I've seen in a long time. It's sort of like Fleabag and these other kinds of shows that I love as well. Anyway, so my point is that I read this article and we learned that 2 couples were not included. It sounded like one couple wasn't included because they highly suspected the guy, because the guy was really into Micah, got rejected, was really into Chelsea, got rejected, and then chose this other woman, this Asian American woman. And the issue seemingly was that they didn't believe this guy was really into this third woman. It seemed like maybe he just wanted to be on the show. So who knows, but that was the claim. Neither of these couples stayed together. And incidentally, every season they apparently exclude certain couples that become engaged. And according to the creator of the show, none of those couples ended up becoming married. I think he was implying that those couples that we excised weren't serious couples. They were probably on the fence, or they just wanted to get on the show. So who knows, but we could see that. So by excluding those 2 couples, was it a result of racism, even subconscious racism? We don't know. It's a question. The larger issue here is that in general, in the United States, and if we think about Hollywood and reality TV, okay, that's one aspect, but just in general, the denial, not only of racism against Asians existing by not just white people, I'm saying a lot of people reject the notion that Asians can be treated in racist ways. Not only a denial of that, but also just the denial that we exist in general. And that's why it's so hurtful when I watch depictions in the United States of communities like Los Angeles, like Seattle, and none of my people are represented because we're always ignored. We're always left out. Seattle is 15% Asian American, 15%. I think Seattle is maybe 7 or 8% black people. So when I saw on Love is Blind that there were seemingly, I can't tell, but they look like there were a number of East Asians, I thought, oh, good. I mean, at least they're being included. And then when they didn't make it to the next round, I don't know. I didn't really register it, but it's just time, if it was just this show, if there was this vast selection of movies and television shows that had rich three-dimensional characters that were Asian American, and our contribution to society or our very existence was recognized by people. When we Asian Americans see that we have two couples on Love is Blind being excluded, and then we see two Asians and we don't see any Asian Americans. And I actually looked up Bliss's ethnicity, and according to the article, Bliss, her father, I think, is Persian, identifies as Persian, and Bliss's mom is black and Hispanic and white. I think that's what it said. Don't quote me on that. Because I thought, well, maybe Bliss and Bliss's mom, they might be Pacific Islander. I don't know, but turns out not so much. Anyway, so when we Asian Americans see that, it's just, the dagger is already in our heart, and that's just a little tap. So here's the thing. If, when it's brought up, people say, hey, that kind of sucks that Asian people are yet again excluded. If people just said, yeah, you know what? I don't know about what happened there, but yeah, that sucks because East Asians, particularly in Seattle, I mean, there are 15% Asian Americans. How come, it sucks? That's all you have to say. Asian Americans, we can't accuse the show of anything because we don't know. Because it could have been a lot of things. It could be circumstance. And even if it was a result of racism, it's not like Love is Blind is unique. It's just another example. So to me, it's like, well, maybe it's a question. We raise the question. And then people hearing that question, if you can't relate to it, just take a beat and think, well, maybe I can't relate to it because I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And just say, well, I'm hearing Asian people talking about Asian American things. So maybe I should just listen. Now, maybe they're wrong. Maybe you, as a non-Asian American, hear an Asian. I'm not saying Asian Americans are right. Asian Americans are Americans, so they're going to be wrong sometimes. But what I'm saying is, you say, well, yeah, maybe. So from us, I say, I think it's wise to raise the question and say, well, who knows about this, but it's just another example. I'm not going to cancel the show. I'm not going to recommend that we boycott the show or whatever. It just raises a question, and it's just a little tap on the knife that's already in our heart. And if you hear that and you can't relate to it, just go, okay, well, I don't know, maybe. And maybe I should think about that the next time I'm casting a show or I'm watching something, There are so many shows that are based in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, I think, is even more Asian American, like 17, I don't know, pretty high percentage. And how many times is the Asian American the guy who works at the store or that distant friend that never talks? Almost never the central character. And even when they are the central character, it's like notable, like Crazy Rich Asians or Beef. An Asian American that's the lead? Whoa. That should literally be happening 15% of the time because most things are shot in LA. So anyway, now I'm not saying it's supposed to be tokenism or quotaism. I'm just saying, what I'm saying. And we can all just hug each other and say, we all love each other and we can believe in each other. And let's try to, listen to each other. That's it. Okay. Anger is good. Love is Blind, number 25. Jake says, so I named the episode Ramsay Bolton Becomes King because I was saying, no, don't do that. That's like if Ramsay Bolton became... Anyway. Jake says, a Game of Thrones reference in the title of a Love is Blind review by a therapist was not on my 2023 bingo card, but I'll take it. Paulina says, y'all remember when Dr. Honda thought this season was going to be boring? LOL. Yeah. Remember that? Because it looked that way. In the beginning of the season, I thought, there's a lot of health here. There's not a lot of rough edges. There was that one guy who talked about leopard print. What was he talking about again? Anyway, that guy seemed like a troll. So it was seeming that we weren't going to see anything. At least if there was going to be drama, it was going to be light drama. But yeah. Yeah. This season is interesting. I could see it going down as historically, like 5 years from now, people will refer to this season and maybe season 1 and season 4. I mean, I really like season 3 as well. Season 2 was good, right? You had Natalie and Shane, and I guess all the seasons are good. But I could see this season being very memorable to people, you know, I think for a variety of reasons. But anyway, maybe it's just because it's in Seattle. Maybe it's just because it's the one that we're watching right now. So yeah. All right. Deep breath. I'm saying that to myself. You can do it with me. And take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.